The Moving Iron Podcast is brought to you by these great sponsors. Are you looking to value your equipment more accurately, target the right buyers and close more deals, reach your ideal customer? Then look no further. Fusable isn't just about ag data, it's about action. Our best-in-class solution empowers you to value your equipment accurately, make informed decisions, and find the perfect prospects. Ignite your dealership's growth at fusable.com/movingiron-podcast. Out in the field, every decision counts. You wouldn't plant without testing your soil, so why would you prospect blind? Introducing EDA, your one-stop shop for ag equipment intel. EDA goes beyond specs and prices. You get deep dive data on every piece of equipment like UCC filings that help track ownership changes and uncover potential sales leads. D&B firmographics, which help you understand the financial health and buying power of potential customers. Market trends that help you stay ahead of the curve, and insights on equipment demands and pricings. With EDA, you're not just looking at data, you're seeing opportunity. Find the right buyer, sell smarter, and build lasting relationships. Visit edadata.com for your free demo and unlock the power of knowledge. For over 80 years, Iron Solutions has been your go-to data source for ag dealers, lenders, and manufacturers. Get powerful appraisal and value forecasting tools that fuel profitable decisions anytime, anywhere. Get your free demo at ironsolutions.com. Iron Solutions, confidence in every click. Today, there are many ways to finance ag equipment, but nobody delivers simple, fast, or flexible financing like AgDirect. Learn more about your options to buy, lease, and refinance equipment at agdirect.com. Valley Transportation has been hauling ag and construction equipment across the country for the past 33 years. Call Parker at 800-657-4910 for all your trucking needs. At Valley Transportation, our goal is to help you reach yours.
When you partner with Axon, you immediately gain access to a full range of products and solutions designed to meet the complex needs of today's grower. We carry all major brands and sizes of tires and wheels. We specialize in large diameter wheels for large equipment. We have one of the largest OEM replacement wheel inventories in North America. Known for extreme flotation setups, duals, and triples, we have wheels for all makes and models of tractors, sprayers, combines, and grain carts. If we don't have the wheel in stock, we'll custom build, sandblast, and paint in-house. There isn't a more vast inventory in North America dedicated to helping dealers move more iron. With facilities on the West Coast and in the heart of the Midwest, leverage our 230,000 square feet of indoor inventory to solve any problem a grower may have. Move more iron with Axon.
Moving iron in the 21st century. Hard-working people working hard for you and me. Moving iron time and time again. Through the years you'll find us here. Moving iron.
Well, welcome to this special edition of the Moving Iron Podcast. Got Shawn Hackett here with me, and we are going to do a deep dive into what Shawn's been talking about on the podcast. He and I talked about this a little bit, and we thought this would be a good opportunity to kind of spend some time and focus on the stuff that we kind of hit the wave tops on as we were going through the podcast. So, Shawn, thanks for taking the time to do this.
Great opportunity, and I'm glad to be able to share this moment here. So,
yep. So this will be good. Been looking forward to this. So, Shawn, let's set the table a little bit to kind of what we're going to talk about. So, kind of let's run through briefly what we're going to kind of what the agenda of the night will look like. We're going to start off talking about your work and what you see happening, but I mean, probably set the table here a little bit. You're going to have to start with the solar cycles and grand solar minimums that we've been talking about, and those kind of things that you hit on. We'll go into some sea surface temperature stuff, and then we'll start talking about what we see happening out there and a few things with La Nina and El Ninos and going through the Tonga volcano and what we saw there from some aftermath of that. That's been almost, 3 years ago since that went off. And then start talking about some South American stuff and some of the work you've done there showing how the climate's changed, weather patterns have changed, the deforestation issues we're seeing down there in South America right now. So, Shawn, I guess where do you want to start first? I guess what's the bedrock of the whole pattern here?
Yeah, I mean the background bedrock for periods of high weather volatility or low weather volatility has to do with the activity of the sun. We know that, or should know that there's an 11-year solar cycle where you go from virtually no sunspots to a peak in sunspots, and we oscillate, kind of back and forth. Maybe I can just show that here. It would make it easier for everyone to maybe kind of see it here and give everyone a framework for what that looks like. Let me just see if I can pull this up here. Let's see. No, I'm trying to find my other tab here. I can't seem to find this here. Why is that? Let's see if I do it this way.
Down at the bottom, stuff is it should say sugar.
Here we go. Yeah, I got it. I'm sorry. Sorry for this. Can you see that, Casey? See it?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, solar cycles. Let's go over this. I want to get to the solar cycle part of this section, and we can kind of go from there. First and foremost, our solar system is made of different planets, different sizes. Each of these planets has a different gravimetric force, a different magnetic force. It spins around its own axis at different rates. It rotates around the sun at different rates. All of this imposes forces on the Earth's atmosphere and on the sun's rotation. So there's something called the barycenter. The barycenter is the center of mass of the solar system. And as these planets rotate and alter their forces, the sun wobbles around its barycenter. There's a you see this, Casey?
Yes, sir.
The barycenter, the circles. Okay, so this is the barycenter. This is the motion of the sun around the barycenter. We know exactly where it's going to be at any point in the future because we know exactly where the planets will be. And so this rotation of the sun around its barycenter is hugely impactful to the sun's overall solar activity and the degree or the strength of the solar wind. The more wobbly the sun is, the more disturbed it becomes, the lower the solar activity and the lower the solar wind. So it's in periods where the wobble is most erratic that we tend to see periods of lower solar output. And so that's really the crux of the whole matter. And this is your 11-year solar cycle. Peak, trough, peak, trough, peak, trough. But notice what happened here, Casey. In 2015, we had a peak that was about half of what it typically normally would be. And the second trough or the second peak that we're developing now is a secondary peak, similarly half. We have not seen two peaks of this low duration for about 220 years during the Dalton minimum, which is the last grand solar cycle minimum or a period of lower sunspots. The prior one to that was the Maunder minimum, which was even a more severe case of lower solar output. This chart here, by the way, this red line and dark line is total solar irradiation hitting the Earth's atmosphere. And these are all your grand solar cycles, roughly 220 years apart. This is the Maunder minimum, the Dalton minimum, the Sporer minimum. notice this here called MM. This was the medieval warming period. This was a period that was so warm that the glaciers on the surface of the Earth declined, I believe, to about 10 or 15% of the Earth's surface. And then, of course, we got to the peak of the solar inactivity here in the late 1600s, and that was the Ice Age, where approximately 60% of the Earth was covered by glaciers. So the point of this entire discussion is that long-term weather volatility, long-term temperature changes are really driven by the activity of the sun and the solar wind of the sun, driven by the motion, magnetic field strength, and gravimetric strength of the planets. What's interesting, Casey, is that there's work that we have found and that we have read and that we've researched that shows that when the planets are closest, when the planets overall are closest to the sun, is when you get your least or your smallest degree of solar activity. So this red line here is the current projection for when and the more negative, that means the closer it is to the sun. The projection of this would be that in the mid-late 2030s is when we'd expect the solar activity to reach a trough. The upper chart here is the Maunder minimum, the worst grand solar cycle of all time. And you can see that we reached that low point here in the early 1700s, which was the Ice Age, in one of the greatest weather volatility periods in Earth's history was right here. This is not going to be as severe as that, but this is telling you why and when to expect the highest degree of the weather volatility and the highest degree of potentially cold weather extremes. If we want to go a little further on to this, Casey, and I don't want to get too crazy with it, but what happens is when the solar activity hitting our atmosphere goes down, the outer stratosphere cools. This is a measure of the temperature differential over the last 15 to 20 years. This is your outer atmosphere. This is how much colder it's gotten because of the quieting of the sun. This is the middle part of the stratosphere, showing how much colder it's starting to get in the middle part of the stratosphere. And this is where we live. Where we live is still getting warmer because we have not seen the translation down from the outer atmosphere to the lower atmosphere yet. It takes about 25 years for this to occur from the quieting of the sun. If you work this through, this suggests that 2025 and beyond is when this cold translation effect will start to impact the lower atmosphere where we live, and we'll start to see an overall cooling trend according to the historical lag between solar activity and not. What's interesting is one of the reasons that weather volatility gets so extreme is because the atmosphere shrinks. This is a chart that shows the thickness of the atmosphere from the surface to the bottom of the atmosphere. What it shows here is that the atmosphere has shrunk 4,400 feet. We're actually 4,400 feet more narrow atmosphere in terms of its thickness over the last 20 years because cold air in the outer atmosphere sinks, and when it sinks, it shrinks the atmosphere. When you do that, you get what's called a wavy meridional jet stream in the northern hemisphere and in the southern hemisphere, meaning that you crimp the atmosphere and you consider the jet stream as a rubber band around the atmosphere, you get north to south, very undulating, back and forth upper airflow pattern, hot meets cold. And when you get that, you have the potential for extreme heat, extreme drought, extreme storms, extreme tornadic activity, extreme hurricanes. This is how you get the atmosphere fired up, is when you get vertical integration, vertical delineation between hot and cold and pressure differentials. This is the quintessential reason that every grand solar cycle minimum in the past has led to historic weather volatility, of which we're about, we believe that the weather volatility cycle began in in 2019, and we believe that the peak of the weather volatility cycle will occur in the late 2030s before it'll start to kind of reverse itself. So in a nutshell, this is really what drives, or what is driving, according to us, this weather volatility cycle.
So just so I'm clear on this, so this is one of those deals where this is how you get 4.5 feet of water in Dubai, and this is how you get northern Minnesota or southern Minnesota to be such a wet spot, and then you just go a few miles to the south and to the west, and you start running into some drought conditions. It's that where these peaks are, depending on where you're at the peak. If you're at the top of the peak or the bottom of the peak, your weather could be wildly different just within a few hundred miles. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, I mean, the way you get weather volatility is you have to have the clashing of warm against cold.
Right.
Vertical amplified airflow pattern creates warm against cold, clashes of air masses, violent tornadic activity, violent thunderstorm activity. It causes stagnant weather patterns. So as long as the phase of the jet stream remains what it is, the storm systems, you get a stagnant pattern where it's wet. It keeps raining in the same place over and over and over. I mean, down here in Florida, just a few weeks back, and we had this stationary tropical system. We got 25 inches of rain. I mean, we're used to getting rain, but 25 inches of rain in a 24-hour period, even for us, is a bit much. We had 900 inches of snowfall a few years back, out west. Broke a record of all time. This is what causes that, and what causes that is the changing of the sun's solar output and a reduction in the solar wind. Now, there's other factors that determine weather patterns, but that's the backdrop. That's the overall backdrop that tells you we are in an escalating weather volatility cycle. And when you get that, it's very difficult to grow global crop production or global crop yields on a regular basis, meaning every time that you think you're getting ahead in one area, it's taking it back in another area. And if you look at crop yields, just in the U.S., for example, or in Brazil, for example, or in Russia, Ukraine, for example, and you look at the last 8 years, crop yields are flat to down in every single major agricultural region that we follow. They're flat to down for an extended period of time. That does not happen in modern day times. Now, and all our historical work on historical crop yields shows that is, in fact, the trend that we tend to be in. It doesn't mean, by the way, you can't have a good crop year. It doesn't mean that every single region gets it bad every year. It just means that this is a difficult time. In a normal weather season, Casey, 8 years out of 10 are good. 2 years out of 10 are challenging. You can grow food all day long, no problems, and we set records in crop production in the 80s and 90s, 2000, no problem. But in this environment, the way we're looking at it, 6 to 7 years out of 10 are going to be really, really bad, and 3 or 4 years are going to be okay. Well, that doesn't cut it, meaning you're not going to make headway. So just as a microcosm, as an example, Russia, Ukraine is experiencing the worst drought, really that we've seen since 2010, 11, and there really isn't a lot of benchmarks that goes over the kind of drought that they're currently and still experiencing, on top of the historic frosts. Remember weather extremes: hot, cold, hot extreme, cold extreme. This is not unusual to see this happen, but they had historic frosts in May that also hurt the crop. We're talking about crop production that is now well below this, below anything we've seen in the last 6 years. In fact, you'd have to go back probably closer to 8 years to see production similar to what it is today. And the year-over-year decline in Russia, Ukraine, forgetting the war and the invasion, we're just talking about crop yields, okay? We haven't seen a crop yield decline like this since 2010, 11 was the last time we saw anything remotely like this. This is the grand solar cycle minimum at work in a great current example of what we're talking about.
So that sheds a few other questions kind of pop up. So we're going through this. If you look at that entire region right now, whether you're talking about Russia, Ukraine, look at India and that whole area in there, you're seeing some dramatic, I don't know what you want to call it, the way the crop mix has gone. And over the last 7 years, that area has just been one of the most highly productive areas on the planet as far as overall crop production goes. Everything from sugarcane to wheat to rice to corn, whatever it is. Now we're starting to see that shrink back up. You start looking at what's going on in India, for example, where for the first time in 7 years, they're starting to import stuff back into the country. I guess, Shawn, as you look at this, how widespread could something like this get in that region, looking at how important that is to the countries like Northern Africa, for example, where a lot of that production goes. As you look at those things, talk a little bit about how you see that interacting and playing out here over the next, couple of years.
The problem, and I guess we can address El Nino, La Nina right now,
Sure.
is that
typically
in a La Nina, Asia does very, very well, right? India usually has good weather, plenty of rainfall. Southeast Asia, plenty of rainfall. Asia is just doing great. I mean, this is when they have the bumper crops and they make up for the El Nino droughts that they occur. The problem is that when you're in a grand solar cycle minimum of this kind, the La Ninas don't turn out to be bumper crops because they get historic flooding. I mean, we have seen historic flooding in southern China for the better part of the last several years that has just put the rice crop underwater to a degree. I mean, I did an analysis that showed that the historic floods in China in the last several years, you have to go back 500 years to see that the last time anything like that. I mean, it's off the charts. In southern Brazil, as a microcosm for Western Hemisphere rice, which includes South America, North America, it's a little different than Asian rice. They had floods they have never seen before in modern day times in Rio Grande do Sul, just devastated the number one rice producer in South America, underwater. In more normal times, they would get a lot of rainfall, but it would be beneficial rainfall. Now what's happening is they're getting rainfall that's over the top. So in the years that they're supposed to put the big crops in, they're not getting them. I always say that the genetics and the precision farming and the ag tech that we have today can handle a lot of things. What they cannot handle is freezing a crop, putting a crop underwater, and temperatures 100 degrees or higher. They cannot handle that. I'm sorry, but we are not good enough with our technology to be able to grow good crops if we're at 100 degrees or higher, if we're underwater, and if we're frozen. And that's what we're seeing more and more and more occur, is those three extremes that the genetics cannot and will not handle. In the northern Iowa, in southern Minnesota, in the southeast of South Dakota, northeast of Nebraska, this is probably one of the top three number one yielding grain areas in the entire world in terms of yield per acre. You'd have to go back to 1993, Casey, for flooding that is even close to this. And I went back to 93 and I don't believe it. I believe this is worse. So I mean, we're looking at something that's at least a 1 in 50 year event, and it's still raining. It's still raining. I mean, we're still getting incredible rainfall over the next week to 10 days in this area. Yeah, they can handle drought. They can handle a lot of things, but when a crop is underwater, the genetics can handle it. And so, I'm not trying to say I'm clicking my heels in excitement over this. I'm not, because this is really difficult for those producers that are in those areas, and it's difficult for trying to grow enough food for feeding and handling the world's needs. At the same time, it's an incredibly exciting time to be watching weather, because no one was alive the last time this happened, right? Last time I checked, no one was alive in the late 1700s to early 1800s the last time this happened. I can read books. I can look at historical data. I can look at tree ring analysis. I can look at ice core samples, and I do all of that. But no one was physically alive still that went through it. And we have the ability today to experience it and log it in a way technology-wise that the next time we go through this 220 years from now, I don't think we're going to get blindsided like I think we're going to get blindsided now, because people somehow only look at the last 30, 40, or 50 years and say, well, that's the weather and that's the trend. And of course, in climate duration, 30, 50 years is a picosecond in weather data. It is not remotely statistically significant to say that any trend over the last 30 or 40 years has anything to do with any long-term change in trends. It isn't at all, and it's not. And people are making a huge mistake in trying to correlate those kinds of trends into thinking that somehow whatever's going on today is unprecedented. I oftentimes read a newspaper article from the mid-1930s. One of the greatest weather volatility periods in the world, in the Earth's history, was the 1930s. And in the summer of 1936, as one year, we had 36, Casey, 36 100-plus degree days in Des Moines, Iowa. 36.
Wow.
In 1934, we had 34 100-degree days in Des Moines, Iowa. You know what the highest number of 100-degree days we've had since the 1930s has been in Des Moines, Iowa since? 10. So as anybody says that the weather volatility today is unprecedented, they need to go back and do some work and do some historical work on what's happened in the past. And you look at what happened in the 30s, it was absolutely insane. If we had 36 100-degree days today, Casey, people would panic. We'd probably shut the whole world down again like we did during COVID. Probably.
Probably right.
So I'm not trying to make light of the matter, but natural forces that affect weather have been affecting weather for a long, long time. We've had ice ages. We've had where the glaciers were dominating the earth. We had warming periods where the glaciers were gone. This is nothing new. We've been doing this for a long, long time. And the point of the matter is not that the weather is changing. It's always changing. I'm 100% believer in climate change. It has to always change because the planets are always moving. The forces are always moving. Climate change is always changing. My job, your job, the job of anyone in agriculture is to determine which direction are things changing, how long is that direction going to change, and when is it going to reverse? Because it always does. It's a pendulum. Nothing goes on forever. Ever goes on forever. Never. Anyone thinks that weather just keeps going on to infinity in the same direction, there is no example of that, and there is not going to be an example of that. So where we are is we are in an accentuated weather volatility cycle like we were in the 1930s, which was more about the Gleissberg cycle, which we can talk about in a little bit, but more akin to what we saw in the late 1700s, early 1800s. And the good news is that this period of weather volatility is going to be rather short, much shorter in duration than we've seen in the past. Meaning, instead of being a 30 or 40-year period I think it's going to be more of a 20-year period. 2020 to 2040 is going to be your window of max weather volatility, which is a good thing, meaning we don't have to endure more than 20 years of this. And fortunately, because of artificial intelligence, quantum computing, technology that stands today, we are much more capable of coming up with solutions faster than ever before to find ways to get around how do we grow food with these kinds of weather extremes. It'll take some time. It'll take some money. It'll take some higher prices in agricultural prices to do so. But we're much more equipped today than we were, let's say, 200 years ago when we were still writing on scrolls. So
right. So let's paint a picture a little bit. So when you're looking at the Dalton minimum and the Maunder minimum, and just kind of a point of reference here. So during the Dalton minimum, you saw some, things like the Gulf of Mexico froze in the port of, not the Gulf of Mexico, but right around like Galveston in that area. You saw some areas like that where things that are typically warm weather areas, you saw ice in some places that you wouldn't necessarily have seen. The Maunder minimum, I remember reading about it in physics class in school when I was going to college that, they weren't able to grow grapes one year in France in the south of France because the weather was too cold, those kind of things. As you're looking at these two past minimums, the one that we're getting ready to go into, I mean, obviously the modern minimum was significantly worse than Dalton minimum, but how do you think this one we're going into is going to stack up compared to those two?
I mean, as I showed on the one chart about how close the plants are going to get to the sun, we're not going to be at a Maunder minimum level, but we're going to be worse than the Dalton minimum level. We're not going to be as long duration as the Maunder minimum level. So what I think it's going to be, Casey, is going to the extremity at the peak is going to be worse than the Dalton, but not as bad as the Maunder, and it's going to be probably half the length of the Maunder, which is a good thing. Meaning we're not going to have to endure this. But from what we've been accustomed to, it's going to be extremely severe. Okay, but in grand solar cycle terms, certainly we're not expecting it to be of the Maunder minimum duration or extreme, something better than that. But we do expect it's going to be worse than the Dalton, which was pretty severe.
Okay. All right. So let's jump over, talk about the Gleissberg cycle a little bit. We've hit on that quite a bit in the podcast. There's a time frame that you're pretty certain that we're looking somewhere between 23 to 25 when we first started talking about it. Somewhere in that time frame we looked at it. I guess Shawn, talk about your work there and where you see that headed.
Let me just pull this chart up if I could, Casey. I think it'll help a little bit. If I can find my PowerPoint again. Let's see if I can find it here. There it is. Let me just get to that section. I got a lot of stuff in here that we can talk about volcanoes a little bit. Apologize. Let me just get down to where here we go. Okay. So what is the Maunder minimum? What is the Gleissberg cycle? The Gleissberg cycle is roughly an 89-year cycle, where if you look at these are your 11-year solar cycles, Casey. And roughly speaking, it's a period where you get an increase in solar activity and then a decrease in solar activity that reaches a trough at the end of 89 years. And that's a result of the motion of the planets of the solar system and its effect on the sun and the rotation around the barycenter that we started the discussion with. What's interesting about this cycle is that when you get to the end of the 89-year cycle, a couple of things occur. And I'll get back on the screen here, Casey. Let me unshare here. So what happens at the end of the Gleissberg cycle is, number one, you get typically a peak in sea surface temperatures, especially of the Atlantic. It's called the AMO, the Atlantic Multicadal Oscillation. When you have a very warm Atlantic, it tends to create extremely active hurricane activity, especially of the larger variety. And we've been seeing a lot of larger volcanoes erupt in recent years. If anyone looks back at Florida hurricanes in the 1930s to early 1940s, it was one of the most unbelievably active times for Category 3-4 hurricanes to hit Florida. We had the 1 year where the levees broke and flooded the whole South Florida. It was a massive disaster. We haven't seen anything like that kind of activity until starting in the last 3 or 4 years. This is what's part of extremely warm sea surface temperatures in the Atlantic that creates this hyperactive ability for storms to go from nothing to something very, very quickly, because you have all that warm water just feeding into. And then if you have an amplified jet stream from the solar activity being down, right? Amplified hot meets cold, warm. I mean, it's you just couldn't dial in a better environment to fire up these storms the way that we've been accustomed to seeing. And so that's going to be a trend that's going to continue for a little while longer. But what happens with the Gleissberg cycle is that once the Gleissberg cycle ends, we begin a change in the sea surface temperature cycle of the Atlantic. Let me show this chart. I think it's really important for people to understand this. This is the bottom chart is the AMO, Casey. The red lines is when the Atlantic is hot. The blue lines are when the.
I don't see your screen.
Oh,
Shawn.
I'm sorry. I guess you can't see it unless I share my screen. Let me do that. Can you see? Can you see it? Let me see. Whoops. All right. Can you see it now, Casey?
No. There you go. Got it.
Okay. So the bottom chart here is the AMO. This is essentially the temperature of the Atlantic, the North Atlantic especially. And you can see that we oscillate cold, warm, cold, warm. It's driven by the rotation of the planets and how it affects the thermohaline system. The thermohaline current is the current that drives the ocean equilibrium, meaning that, for example, the Gulf Stream is part of the thermohaline system, where the warm water gets pushed to the north and it spins around in a winding current. Based upon how the planets are altering, there's times that you get upwelling in the oceans, and there's times you get downwelling in the forces, and they either speed up or slow down the thermohaline system. Right now, we're in the mode where the thermohaline system is starting to slow down. When that happens, you will start to get a cooling in the North Atlantic, and it triggers a long period of cooling Atlantic Ocean temperatures, which of course reduces hurricane activity, but also increases weather volatility. Cold sea surface temperatures, Casey, cool the air above it. Air above it then sinks. And when you have sinking motion, it creates significant weather volatility in the atmosphere. And what I was trying to show here in this particular chart is there's times when the Pacific decadal oscillation and the Atlantic multidecadal oscillation are both in the cold phase at the same time. It happens every 60 years. If you look at when the last one started, it started in 1965. If we go 60 years ahead, it would say that we should start to see the Atlantic Ocean start to cool after 2025. We already have a cold Pacific. We're already in a cold PDO phase. A cold PDO phase, by the way, perpetuates La Nina more than El Nino, meaning the base state of the Pacific wants to be in a La Nina. So you will be in you'll have many, many more years of a La Nina base state, and you'll have very, very short windows of El Nino. Great example is what we've just seen in the last 5 years. We had a 3-year La Nina. We had a very quick shot El Nino this past year, and we're already moving back towards a La Nina. This tends to be, a drier pattern for South America and North America, and tends to be a wetter pattern, generally speaking, for Asia. But because we are in a grand solar cycle minimum, and because we have this amplified jet stream, what we're getting is more extreme droughts and more extreme flooding. And that is causing a cascading effect that is going on to this day, and that will accelerate into the mid to late 2030s. So our expectation is that we're in peak heat right now, meaning the sea surface temperatures are reaching their peak. The above ground temperatures are reaching their peak, just like they did in the late 1930s to early 1940s. The last time that the Gleissberg cycle ended, the last time that we had a very warm Atlantic. And then, of course, we began 40 years of cooling. I know when I grew up as a kid in the 1970s, and all I heard was, we're going to all starve to death because we're going into an ice age. This was mid-late 1970s. That's all we were being told, because it was so cold for so long. We couldn't grow food. And of course it wasn't, because we were not in a grand solar cycle. We were in a sea surface temperature cycle, which of course was going to start to turn after the early 1980s based upon the movement of the planet. So all this are things that are part of the long-term natural cycle of things that I feel that people are missing when they're talking about climate change, and not really understanding what has happened in the past and where we are today is fairly predictable based upon those factors. And the big thing that, of course, absolutely nobody on the planet is expecting is that we're going to start to see, according to historical work, a cooling cycle begin post-2025, meaning a general trend towards cooler temperatures, weather volatility continuing to be off the charts, and that is something that no one expected. The global cooling in the 1970s to end. It was going to go on forever, and of course it didn't. And everyone expecting the current warming period that we've been in, perfectly describable by the warm Atlantic, to continue forever. And there's no example of that ever happening, and I don't think it's going to happen now. So,
all right. So in the chart you showed, the Pacific was starting to show signs of cooling, and you're saying that the Atlantic is going to start to cool too. So you're going to have both oceans going through a cooling cycle, and then you throw that on top of everything else that we got in there. What does that mean? Is that
sure? Let me.
Is that even worse?
Yeah. Well, let me just let me pull this up here again, and I can. Let's see here. Okay. So what's interesting is that these are the different phases, combinations of the Atlantic and the Pacific. Okay, Casey?
Okay.
I'm just looking at the U.S. because obviously most people watching this program are going to be focused on U.S. weather. I can do this analysis in Europe. I can do it in Asia. I can do it in South America. But nonetheless, let's just focus on the U.S. here for this purpose. We have been in a cold Pacific and a warm Atlantic for the better part of the last 20 years. Okay? And the predominance of this pattern is a drought in the western portion of the country. Anyone that's been following U.S. weather knows that we've been in a perpetual drought crisis out west for the better part of the last 20 years, give or take a few periods of pause. I mean, it was just a few years back that we had some hot shots on scientists going on saying that the drought that we were in at that time was going to go on for 200 years. It was never going to end. And of course, it was complete nonsense. And now we've had incredible moisture out west, massive snowfall. We refilled all the water up. It's just not the way weather works. It doesn't work that way. We're not in a perpetual change in the pattern. That what we were in is that in this form we get consistently, historically, we've gotten a drought pattern out west. We're still in it, but we're starting, we believe we're going to morph into this, Casey. This B right here. Okay. And which means that the drought out west is just going to disappear. It's going to be gone. We're not going to be dealing with any western drought for the most part. But notice this very uncomfortable blob in the middle of the country where we grow a lot of grain. Unfortunately, this pattern shift does not help the center of the country. In fact, if you look at where the center of the country is, actually it gets worse. So while the west gets a lot more moisture, the east gets a lot more moisture, in terms of where we grow grain, the center of the country is actually still problematic. So this is not good news if you're looking at grain production in the center of the country, center west of the country. The shift to a cold Atlantic multi-decadal oscillation would really mean, kind of a worsening effect of the drought there. But it would improve drought in the north, in the west, in the east, but it would create problems in the center of the country. So there's always somebody that's getting a better go at it, and there's always somebody that's getting a worse go at it. But this is the change of precipitation patterns during the summer growing season that we would expect to see once we shift or change to a warm AMO post 2025.
Do you expect that to last the same amount of time as what we've seen over the last 20 years with this current
Well,
oscillations?
The chart I showed before, if you look at the duration of a negative PDO and a negative AMO, it's typically lasts 10 years.
Okay.
10 years. So we would expect, let's just say 2026, 2036, that window would be the window where we would have that negative PDO, negative AMO combination, and then the PDO would move warmer, and then we would shift to a different pattern. So this is a decade-long problem based on sea surface temperatures alone. It's not a 20 or 30-year problem. It's a 10-year problem. It just so happens that the last time this happened, between mid-late 1960s and mid and late 1970s, we weren't dealing with a grand solar cycle minimum, so the effects were much more muted to what we're going to see now.
Okay. So I guess that really kind of sheds a little light on that. And you were talking about South America earlier and how, La Nina affects South America and what we see happening there. As you look at South America right now, probably a month and a half ago on the podcast, you talked about one. I think the name of the podcast, if you want to go back and find it, was "Has a Golden Goose Been Cooked?" If I remember correctly, something like that.
Have we killed the golden goose?
Have we killed the golden goose? There you go.
Yeah.
And so, if you want to go back and check that one out, Shawn talks about this a little bit, but he brought something up that I'd never heard anyone talk about, and just like he does all the time. But I guess should we talk about the Beaufort-Gyre a little bit before we get to South America?
Yeah, let's finish. Yeah. We'll talk about the Beaufort-Gyre and then move into that, because that is part of the sea surface temperature cycle, and it's probably a good thing to go over as a trigger. One of the reasons that the AMO or the Atlantic gets cold is because of this. This is the Beaufort Gyre or Gyre, however you want to say it. People say it different ways, but this is northwest. This is Greenland over here. This is northwest of Greenland, and what happens is that normally, we have a clockwise rotation that all the melting ice that you get during a period of warming, all that fresh cold water gets trapped, and it just, as we spin clockwise, it gets larger and larger and larger, but at some point it reverses, meaning we get a reversion to a counterclockwise rotation of the Beaufort-Gyre. If anybody wants to follow this, the Woodhull Institute does fantastic work on this, and they wrote a paper, I think it was a year ago, maybe it was 18 months ago, give or take, where the title of the paper was "The Imminent Reversal of the Beaufort-Gyre," meaning the work that they have done said they were in the early stages of reversing the Beaufort-Gyre, and that it could be the greatest climatic crisis effect over the next 100 years, according to them, not my wording, their wording. And the reason why they said this is because the last time this reversed was in the mid-late 1960s and caused this dramatic weather volatility increase, cooling temperatures, and a very difficult time of growing food. The problem is that this cycle has gone on longer than it did back then, meaning the amount of cold, fresh water that is in there is twice as large as it was in the mid-late 1960s. So the effect of reversing the Beaufort-Gyre this time around would have a twofold greater impact to global weather volatility and weather extremes, and I think that's why they're calling it potentially the 1 in 100 year, weather crisis event to be on watchful for. So this is how you get. This is one of the mechanisms of how you get the North Atlantic to dramatically cool, and when you push fresh cold water in the North Atlantic, you desalinate the ocean, meaning that the salination of the ocean goes down. So if you look at the GSA, this is called the Great Salinity Events. You can see how the salinity of the Atlantic Ocean crashed from the late 1960s and 70s because of the Beaufort-Gyre reversing, and really didn't turn around until the early 1980s when the Atlantic Ocean started to warm again. So this is a big event, Casey, that everyone needs to follow. If you hear the Woodhull Institute put out a warning or alert that the Beaufort-Gyre has reversed, you had better be ready and prepared for some of the most dramatic altering changes in our climate and our ability to grow food since the late 1960s, and potentially even more than that because of the larger amount of cold fresh water that's there and the fact that we're now in a grand solar cycle that we were not in back then. So definitely a huge signpost to watch as a trigger for getting this Atlantic Ocean to shift from warm to cold.
That also slows down the Gulf Stream, right? So
yes, it
amount
slows down the thermaline system that's already
Yeah.
slowing. Yes, when you have it's capillary action. So when the salinity goes down, it reduces the capillary action down below and slows down the thermaline system, of which the Gulf of Mexico is part of. The more you slow that down, the more it keeps the warm waters, in the tropics, and it prevents the warming of the waters further north and creates an overall cooling oceans in the north, which then affects the temperatures in the northern hemisphere, Europe, the United States, such forth and so on. So,
yeah, big deal. Okay,
we should
All right,
probably
so
talk. We should probably talk volcanoes a little bit, maybe.
Yep, that's a good one too. I wanted to bring up the Tonga volcano. That's been about 3 years since that went off, and as you talked about, I think there was something like 70,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools worth of water vapor got put into the atmosphere, and it's obviously water vapor is greenhouse gas, and we've seen some amplified temperatures in areas that NASA has pointed back to say, hey, some of this could be the effect of the Tonga volcanic event, because we never had a volcano of this size go off underwater in written history. So you don't really have a playbook to go by. But Shawn, as you're looking at this specific volcanic event, talk about some of the work you're seeing there and where are we at in that phase. And then also as the grand solar cycles go through this period of time where weakening magnetic forces are in play, you start seeing some more, geological events like earthquakes and volcanoes start to happen. So I guess talk a little bit about those two things.
Well, backing up for 1 second, the reason the sun gets quiet is because the 4 magnetic fields that spin around the sun, which spin around at different rates, become destructive, meaning they're on opposite sides of the sun. And when they're opposite sides of the sun, magnetic fields cancel each other out and the magnetic field strength of the sun goes down. When that happens, the protective shield that the sun provides for the Earth on galactic cosmic rays that are coming in goes down. And those galactic cosmic rays are then able to bombard Earth's atmosphere and Earth's surface at a much higher rate than normal. When they do that, it reduces or weakens the magnetic field strength of the Earth. The magnetic field strength of the Earth has fallen 15% over the last 15 years because of this increase in these highly charged galactic cosmic rays particles. When you do that and you alter the magnetic forces of the center of the Earth, you awaken and you disturb the tectonic nature of the Earth. Greater number of earthquakes, greater number of large earthquakes. And historically, in grand solar cycles, you've always had a preponderance or increase in large volcanic explosions or large volcanic eruptions. They measure volcanic eruptions, what's called the Volcanic Explosivity Index, or VEI. It's rated from 1 to 8. 8 means we're all dead. 7 means most of us are dead. So we don't want a 7 or an 8, or else most of us are not going to be on this podcast for much longer. Okay, not trying to be morbid. I'm just saying, that what we're looking for is for a VEI 6, which are ones that can dramatically impact global weather for at least 3 years, as the aerosols that those volcanic eruptions put into the stratosphere remain for an extended period of time. As an example, Mount Tambora, which was a VEI 7, really strong one. VEI 7 was Mount Tambora, went off, I believe, in I'm trying to remember the exact date. I think it was 1815 or 1812
or 15,
something like that.
Yep.
But the following 2 years after 1812, if you type in your computer the year without a summer, you'll see that we had frost in Iowa in the 2 years from that volcanic eruption. That volcanic eruption was a sulfur dioxide aerosol volcanic eruption. It was an above ground volcano that pushed aerosols 30 kilometers into the stratosphere and those sulfur dioxide crystals block the sun from coming in and let the heat escape. It's a massive cooling effect, which is one of the reasons that the grand solar cycles tend to have a cooling effect on the Earth. What's different about Tonga is that it was an underwater volcano, meaning that when it blew its top off, it was a VEI 6, but the actual column, the way you measure a volcano, it's not only the column height, but it's the amount of material that you displace into the stratosphere. The column actually punctured the mesosphere, Casey. From my work, only one of the volcanoes ever actually been known to puncture the mesosphere. It was crazy. You had a satellite picture of the outer atmosphere bulging from this volcanic eruption, and it doubled the water vapor concentration in the atmosphere in literally 24 hours. This is completely different. It's a 1 in 1,000 year event. We have not seen anything like this for 1,000 years. To have water vapor aerosols get pumped in versus sulfur dioxide. When you do that, it's a heating effect versus a cooling effect. The water vapor is the greatest greenhouse gas known to man, known to humans. And as a result of that, it was speculated at the time from the greatest science minds of the world that this was going to cause at least 3 to 5 years of some of the hottest potential weather extremes ever seen in Earth's history, recorded history. And we've seen that. We've been breaking records all over the world, left and right, because of this water vapor effect. In addition, Casey, because you have so much moisture in the atmosphere, where it's wet, you have access to huge amounts of moisture that creates even greater degree of flooding that you would normally expect to see. We are seeing evidence that the water vapor aerosols in the stratosphere are beginning to precipitate out. This happens. It takes 3 to 5 years, but eventually the sulfur dioxide and the water vapor aerosols will precipitate out. We're starting to see this precipitate out, which means that we're likely going to see maybe one more year of the Tonga effect, hot, dry extremes and extreme flooding before the Tonga effect goes away, and we'll be waiting for the next volcanic eruption to start on a different cycle. The next volcanic eruption almost certainly is going to be a sulfur dioxide eruption like it normally is. We normally have 3 of these in a grand solar cycle minimum. We have 1 down, 2 to go. But the impact of precipitating the water vapor out of the stratosphere now, Casey, means we have even more moisture. We have an extremely, very, very moisture-ridden atmosphere now. So where the teleconnections want to rain, we have endless capacity to produce rain in areas where the micro teleconnections are suggesting, which means that this year and next, the flooding that we can see in the areas that are supposed to get wet will likely be more epic than we've even already seen. So what I worry about and what I'm thinking about is that if we're moving into more of a La Nina environment between now and next year, Asia is supposed to get all the rain in more of a La Nina environment. They're supposed to get the rain in an environment where we have a grand solar amplified jet stream and the precipitating out of the Tonga. The flooding in Asia could be outrageously bad. Yeah, outrageously bad. So at a time that they're supposed to have bumper crops during a La Nina, they're going to have potentially, the worst crops potentially they've ever seen. And that's what I would look for in Asia between now and, let's say, the end of 2025, is flooding off the rails in India, in Southeast Asia, in China, to create. Remember, genetics cannot handle being underwater. They cannot handle 100 degrees plus, and they cannot handle being frozen. So you get those 3. I don't care what seeds you plant, you're not going to produce a good crop. Period. End of story. And that's the problem with this environment, is that everyone thinks that we have genetics that are impervious to weather volatility, and they're right within a normal range, but they're not right in the range that we're in. And that's what to pay attention to here.
All right, we'll move down to South America now.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so talk about South America. Again, go back and listen to that podcast. Have we killed the golden goose? Shawn put that out. We put that out, I don't know, a month and a half ago. I'll repost it so everybody can see what that is. But long story short is the weather patterns in South America have changed, and the work that you're talking about, it's not work that you're doing, Shawn. It's work that you found, and you're compiling this work. And
I want to be very, very clear. I want to be very, very clear. I have piggybacked on some incredibly smart scientists. I've read thousands and thousands of papers over the last 30 years of some of the smartest minds that have spent their entire life researching, all of this. And all I have done is taken their research. I've done the studies. I've done the work to find out which cycles are most important that can create a window of what weather's going to do. I put them all into sort of an algorithm so that I can present it in a usable fashion to those that that are my customers. But no, I mean, none of this is my work, but the putting together of all these cycles, the researching of all these smart people, and all of them are highlighted in my reports and my slides. Everything is in there. I mean, everyone is awarded their effort here. But so yeah, I am not the one that came up with all this work, but I am the one that's kind of putting it all together. And it's kind of like Wheel of Fortune. You get more letters and you get more letters, and then you go, oh, that's what it is. And that's what I'm trying to do is you get more of these cycles and you go, well, that's what it is. And that's the power of bringing all this together, is to being able to say, what does all this mean? What does it mean? And how do you go about projecting the future for prices in agriculture and how farmers should handle it? But yeah, definitely, I'm not the one that's come up with all this stuff. I wish I was that smart.
Yeah, it would be something. But if you're looking at what's going on in South America, the information that you've gathered shows that because of deforestation and where that's at, you're starting to see a changing of how weather patterns develop and move through the key growing areas of north and south Brazil, and some of the areas that we see where typically you would see a rainy season that would be, there, but it's not. And right now we're going through, I think in that podcast you mentioned that this is typically a down cycle in the rainy seasons for these for Brazil, and then you amplify it with here. So I guess talk a little bit about that and what the work is that you're seeing.
Yeah, there's I can't, I don't have the right chart here, unfortunately. I don't know why it's not here, but anyway. Oh yeah, it is here. It is here. Can you see the screen, Casey?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So this top left corner chart is Brazil moisture this year, and going back 10 years. Notice that this is northern Brazil. This is this area here. Notice that it was a rainforest, very consistent, steady rainfall for 30 years, just really not much variation. And then precipitation has dropped off by 50% in the last decade. No one can explain this. There is no example of this ever happening before. This is an anomaly. So I started trying to determine what the heck is going on here. How can this be happening? Now understand, we had way too much rainfall here. We didn't need all this rainfall to grow good crops, Casey. Okay, so sort of this has been masked because even though precipitation was falling, it was still sufficient to grow a crop. But 2015 and this past year, these levels of precipitation are starting to reach the threshold that they're not enough to grow a good crop anymore. So we're now at levels that the crop is now getting insufficient rainfall. And if we were to get any further degradation of rainfall, in the years ahead, and I think that's likely going to happen, we can have some major long-term crop issues. This is northern Brazil, by the way. I'm speaking about northern Brazil specifically. Brazil's a big place. The monsoon affects northern Brazil. This is a northern Brazil moisture situation. But where's all the production growth come from, Casey? It's come from planting extra acres in the north. If we continue to fall in rainfall and we don't produce enough rainfall, then all this productive ground is going to become unproductive. We're not going to be able to increase acres. We're not going to be able to increase yields. We've already not been able to increase yields for the last 10 years in Brazil as a whole. We've just been increasing acres. So our working theory, and the theory of many smart people, far smarter than us, that we've been reading over the last many years, is suggesting that approximately 20% of the Amazon has been deforested in favor of planting crops. An additional 20% is in what we call serious, almost terminal degradation. And the atmospheric river that the Amazon creates by creating this upward draft of moisture and creating this almost rainforest-like northern Brazil, in our view, we've gone too far. We've taken too much of it down. And if that theory is correct, and if this dramatic 50% decline in precipitation is a function of this, Casey, then we are in a world of hurt. And that Brazil, which has been really the only place that's been able to really grow grain in a meaningful way to keep balance, isn't going to be able to do it. And if they're not able to do it, who can? And I don't have an easy answer for you, but I really believe this is a big trend that is just starting to reach a critical point that needs to be watched. And I do believe in this particular case, Casey, it is humans that have created the microclimate change that's unfavorable, whereas I believe that the climate change we're seeing globally is more a function of natural forces. But what's going on in Brazil definitely is the result of humans mowing down the forest and planting crops versus letting the Amazon stay as it's supposed to be. So humans can have a change in local climates, and that's a great example of one.
So it'd be similar to what happened maybe like during the Dust Bowl, for example, with taking acres out and production into western areas of the United States, and subsequent the temperatures that came along with that too. I mean, that was another microcosm there of that. You already had an increased heat temperature anyway, and then you threw that on top of it, and you kind of amplified that as well.
Absolutely, that was another example. Now we figured out that we killed the golden goose, and we made changes, and we made remedies, and you can get yourself out of this. What's gone on down there, we can reforest. I mean, we can turn it around. It has been done. It can be done, but they have to have the will to do it. So far, I don't see. All I hear them saying is we're going to reduce the rate of deforestation. Well, that ain't going to cut it. We're already gone too far. I mean, they need to reverse the trend. At some point, they'll do it. I mean, economics rules everyone, including any country. It's the economics that drive policy eventually. Because without any money, there is no government, there is no rule, and there is no policy. So at some point, that will change. And so I don't want to say that what's happened down there is irreversible. Although the Amazon is a very unique ecosystem that could be a little more complicated, but I do believe we can resuscitate it if we had the will to do it. So,
for sure. All right, Shawn. Any final thoughts you want to put out there about your work or things you see coming ahead of us here?
I think the most important thing at this point, I think, is to keep your eyes wide open. That prices for agriculture are going to be very, very volatile. When we're ragingly high, like we were several years ago, you as a producer need to be taking action to bring more money home on the farm, despite how bullish things may look at that time. And when things are low and they've crashed because, there are give and takes like we are today, the end user, those that buy physical corn, physical soybeans, physical meal, you need to bring more money home on your farm, on your production side, meaning both sides are going to get great opportunities to lock in cheap inputs or to lock in very high prices for production. And in this environment, no one state is going to last for very long. It's going to continue to oscillate. So the point that I'm trying to convey is this is not everything's going to go up forever and don't worry about it. It means you're going to have tremendous opportunities, but they're going to be short, sweet, and quick. And you have to have a plan to be able to use that to your advantage. A proactive farmer brings more money home on the farm. A reactive farmer sells their farm to somebody else. And what I'm trying to encourage, and I always try to encourage, is producers, end users, and producers of grain and agriculture, is to be the proactive one, the one that's using this weather volatility and price volatility to their advantage instead of reacting. Reacting means selling grains now into harvest because I didn't sell when times were good. Or producers not buying in 2020 when things were good and buying in 2021-22 when prices were double and triple what they were. That is reactive farming. That is farming that I'm trying to avoid that type of fact pattern or that type of behavior. I'm trying to create the behavior of being aware of what is likely to come. So when it comes, you know what you need to do. Keep an eye on the Beaufort-Gyre. Keep an eye on the next big volcanic eruption, VEI 6. Remember, if anyone out there tells you VEI 6, remember what we said on this show. Remember what it means. It means hyperactive weather volatility beyond what we've normally seen. The next solar cycle, Casey, because right now we're peaking in the 11-year solar cycle, and then we're going to start going down. But the next cycle after this, our work says we may have very little or almost no sunspots in the 2030s, a sun-spotless decade. This is something that happened in the Maunder minimum, where we had a period of that we actually didn't have any sunspots during the typical cyclical peak. It's shorter, so it's not Maunder in terms of length, but we could have a brief period of Maunder. That's another thing to kind of keep an eye on, because that's really going to be what causes the peak in weather volatility, in that period of time. Crop insurance is hugely important in this environment. Insurance is going to keep going up because most of the insurance industry is going off actuarial tables that span the last 100 years, which does not come even close to the kind of damage and weather volatility and payouts that they have to pay. And as a result, they're greatly under-reserved. And so just as an example, this flooding that we had from the hurricane last year in Florida, almost every single insurance company left the state because they didn't have enough money to pay out this kind of an event, which quite frankly is by no means anywhere close to the worst case scenario for Florida. Most of this happened in fairly unpopulated Florida. You get a major hurricane that comes into southeast Florida where I live, Miami, Broward County, Palm Beach County, 12 million people. I mean, you can't imagine the damage that would occur if we had the big. Let me put it this way: it's a guarantee we're going to have a major, major hurricane hit southeast Florida in the next 20 years. Absolutely 100% certain that's going to happen. And there is absolutely no way that any insurance company can pay. My view is that the whole insurance industry is going to go into receivership, meaning that the U.S. government's going to basically give them a guaranteed backstop, because without it, you won't be able to insure anything. As crazy as that sound, as mad as maybe many people may get from me saying that, tell me who is going to be able to make a payout based upon the damage that will be caused from a hurricane hitting southeast Florida. The real estate values, the cost of production, the cost of rebuild, it's beyond imaginable, Casey. So there you have it. And that's just hurricanes. That's not talking about tornadoes. That's talking about earthquakes. That's talking about all kinds of other things that have caused incredible damage and continue to do so. So the last takeaway I want to say is that I don't say any of this with glee, with excitement, with other than I'm a weather fanatic, and so I'm extremely excited to see this weather period because it's a dynamic weather environment that we haven't seen in a long time. But I'm not excited about the forecast. I really wish I could give a different forecast because it is going to cause a lot of difficulties for many people. Not to mention just humanitarian issues with rolling food shortages that may occur from time to time. But for those in production of agriculture, you are in the right spot at the right time, and you should be able to take advantage. Meaning, not every region, Casey, has a bad crop year every year. Meaning, it rolls around. One year the U.S. is great and Russia's terrible. You're going to have your day where you have supplies to sell at a high price. So it's not all doom and gloom. I don't want anyone to think that at all. It's actually potentially the most prosperous period in agricultural history coming up if you're proactive. And that's the takeaway. Be proactive. And if you are, I've never been more excited about what lies ahead for those in agriculture to bring more money home on the farm.
All right, Shawn. That was good stuff, man. We went a little bit over an hour, about an hour and 15, hour and 16 minutes here. A lot of good stuff. I'll post this on my normal podcast platform, so it'll be out there, audio and video both. It'll be out there so you guys can take a look at all that. If you have any follow-up questions you want to have Shawn, send me an email at movingironpodcast at movingironpodcast.com or hit me up on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram at Moving Iron LLC. Go to LinkedIn at Moving Iron Podcast. You can also go to the Moving Iron website, which is movingironllc.com. As a contact me partner, you can get hold of me there as well. Shawn, you can find him on Twitter at Faradex11, and also just Sean Hackett on LinkedIn. You can find him there as well. So any other places, Shawn, people can reach out to you and get hold of you if they need to?
I'm using the website Hackett, Hackett advisors.com. We post some stuff on there. We have information to subscribe to our services and that sort of thing. Keep tabs of what we're doing. Yep.
So right on. Well, Shawn, I appreciate you taking the time to do this. It was very interesting. I think, again, kind of diving into some of those wave caps that we hit on the podcast on Tuesday mornings, Thursday morning when we do that. So appreciate that, Shawn. We'll catch you again here hopefully on Thursday.
Sounds good, Casey. Thanks you so much.
Thanks, Shawn. Our podcast is brought to you by these great sponsors. Are you looking to value your equipment more accurately, target the right buyers and close more deals, reach your ideal customer? Then look no further. Fusable isn't just about ag data, it's about action. Our best-in-class solution empowers you to value your equipment accurately, make informed decisions, and find the perfect prospects. Ignite your dealership's growth at fusable.com/movingiron-podcast. Out in the field, every decision counts. You wouldn't plant without testing your soil, so why would you prospect blind? Introducing EDA, your one-stop shop for ag equipment intel. EDA goes beyond specs and prices. You get deep dive data on every piece of equipment like UCC filings that help track ownership changes and uncover potential sales leads. D&B firmographics, which help you understand the financial health and buying power of potential customers. Market trends that help you stay ahead of the curve, and insights on equipment demands and pricings. With EDA, you're not just looking at data, you're seeing opportunity. Find the right buyer, sell smarter, and build lasting relationships. Visit edadata.com for your free demo and unlock the power of knowledge. For over 80 years, Iron Solutions has been your go-to data source for ag dealers, lenders, and manufacturers. Get powerful appraisal and value forecasting tools that fuel profitable decisions anytime, anywhere. Get your free demo at ironsolutions.com. Iron Solutions, confidence in every click. Today, there are many ways to finance ag equipment, but nobody delivers simple, fast, or flexible financing like AgDirect. Learn more about your options to buy, lease, and refinance equipment at agdirect.com. Valley Transportation has been hauling ag and construction equipment across the country for the past 33 years. Call Parker at 800-657-4910 for all your trucking needs. At Valley Transportation, our goal is to help you reach yours. This podcast is proudly provided by Axon, helping dealers move more iron for the past 100 years. Find out more at axontire.com. Move more iron with Axon.
Moving iron in the 21st century.